Hello, everyone. It's me, the Prof Hog. Join me for a new series as we look at everything financial and investment related and try and get a little bit smarter together. Let's do it. Lesson one's going to be a topic very close to my heart about stoozing, which is earning from interest-free borrowing, the pros, cons, how it works, and whether you should do it or not. All right, so first up, what is stoozing? The best way I can summarize this is it's the practice of borrowing money, typically at 0%. It can technically be for above zero, but normally it's 0%. Normally it's via a credit card. And then you're basically using the money that you park on the credit card and investing it somewhere else, earning a return elsewhere, and then repaying back the credit card once the free period is over. So if we look at the basic mechanics, first of all, you apply for a 0% card. Now, there are two different types. We'll look at the scenarios in a bit more detail, but essentially 0% spend or 0% balance transfer. And both of those things do similar. Balance transfers tend to have fees associated to them, but means you can immediately take all of the arbitrage between the two percentages. Spending is exactly what it sounds like. You basically spend everything on the credit card, and what you would have put on a debit card or taken as cash, you put elsewhere. So that might take a few months to fill up, depending on, what your living expenses are and the size of the credit limit you have. But both of them really achieve the same thing in a fractionally different way. So what I think this is worth stressing, almost all credit cards require you to make minimum payments. In the UK, it's very straightforward. You just set up a DD. Many other jurisdictions will have recurring payments of some description. But yeah, if you have access to SEPA DD or something similar, then that's the way to do it. It just takes any of the kind of admin out of it. Also, as well, it's worth noting that most credit cards will take away the 0% if you miss a payment. So hence, whenever I do this, I always set it up with minimum payments on the credit card just to make sure there's no issue around it. Then what you also want to do is make sure you repay the balance in full before the promo ends. I typically will advise you to sort of either set yourself a reminder or put it in a spreadsheet somewhere, and then literally the day before or maybe a week before, just to make sure everything clears, you just pay it off in full. And that will be easy to do because if you're nice and disciplined, you will have put this money into an account. It will not be exposed to the stock market, and it will be very secure and safe. And then you'll use that money to pay off the interest. Sorry, to pay off the amount that you borrowed before the interest starts kicking in. Now, depending on where you are, there may well be fees up front, especially if you're doing a balance transfer. Again, we'll touch on that in some of the examples. And also there could be taxes. This is basically earned interest income. And so again, depending on where you are, your limits, etc., there could also be taxes that you'll have to factor in as well. Once you've done all of those things, you basically keep the profit, which is your earned interest between the two things. So that's stoozing. As a summary, let's look at some examples now. All right, so some examples. I want to have a look at both standard types, so 0% purchase and 0% balance transfer. Normally, your purchase will have shorter terms, but typically they'll be sort of 1 to 2 years. And as I touched on previously, you spend normally and basically you just put everything onto the card that you would normally have put onto a debit card or use from your current account or something along those lines. Balance transfers can have longer periods. I've seen them actually go up to 4 years is the longest I've ever seen, which is pretty amazing. And there you're basically moving debt. So you'll potentially consolidate. You might have done this on a previous card. Maybe the previous card was a purchase card where you were just using it normally. And at the end of the 2 year period, actually, instead of paying back the money that's on the card, you'd rather do a balance transfer and just keep this up for as long as possible. I think it's worth noting that balance transfers typically incur a 1 to 3% fee. Normally it's 1 to 1.5%, but I've definitely seen it go into the 3% and probably even a little bit higher as well. But I would advise anyone, once you start going above 3%, you sort of lose some of the benefit of doing this because of the fact you have to pay this and it just eats into it. If we have a look at a specific example, we're going to do a 5K balance transfer. It's going to cost us 1% to do so, and we're going to take an 18-month scenario. So we've got our £5,000. We basically, instead of having to pay it back, we transfer it over and the 5K will stay in a savings account. Now, I do advise a savings account rather than a stock market or anything that's exposed to any kind of movement. Ultimately, this is wise to keep the money in a nice, safe place. You don't strictly have to, especially if you've got good cash flow and you've got, you're comfortable on the income, that maybe 5 grand isn't that much to you and you're confident you can cover it. But generally, especially if you're getting started, I think it makes sense to have it there. That's advisable in my opinion. And in this example, after 18 months, you would have earned interest of £375. I'm assuming that, in the UK, you wouldn't have to pay tax on that unless you're very, 1% earner. So we're going to assume you're a fairly normal, maybe even a higher rate taxpayer. So, there's no taxes on 325 or £375. Interest, however, you will have to pay that 1% balance transfer, so that's going to take £50 off. But this has basically netted you 325 quid that you would not have had otherwise, right? And that's the thing here. This is just free money, and as long as you're disciplined, then it's a powerful way of actually generating at least a few £100s. And depending on sort of your credit score and how many of these cards you have up and running, you can go into thousands as well. So it can become quite powerful quite quickly. A friend of mine actually has about 70,000 on credit cards. Kind of amazing. Has very complex spreadsheets and everything else. And basically has used it to get himself some premium bonds and actually overpay his mortgage. So that's some way of doing it. So that's how he does it. But anyway, I want to look at the pros and cons now and eventually decide and give you my opinion about whether you should be doing it or not. So these are the pros of stoozing, in my opinion. We're going to start with the simplest one, which is essentially that you're using somebody else's capital, somebody else's money, without having to any charges on top of it, right? The whole thing with interest is just basically the cost of borrowing or the cost of lending, depending on which side of the transaction you are. But here you're basically able to access somebody else's money and use it without having to pay anything for it. I would describe this as actually low risk. It's interesting, like as I've touched on once or twice, I actually have a certificate in financial planning. Don't practice as a financial advisor, so definitely don't listen to me from that regard. I'm not a professional in that regard. I just have the qualification. And it was very much suggested when I was learning my CFP that, this was known at the time. It was definitely accepted as something you could do, but it wasn't recommended. People were just, they couldn't do it. They lacked the discipline, and actually it was high risk. I think that's like with the access to information that we have now. I mean, this is almost 2 decades ago that I had that learning. I think you can make a reasonable suggestion. This is actually quite low risk, certainly compared to some of the things out there, like CFDs and actually other types of leverage where it can get quite exposed quite quickly. Really, here, no capital should be at risk. You don't have to expose it to the market. You can put it in a nice, safe place. I tend to put mine in premium bonds. Again, capital protected, and it will get me sort of 4%. But I also have a little bit of money in a high interest savings account at 7%. So, I think these kind of percentages are still reasonably valid. So, yeah, low risk, predictable returns as well. You should actually know what the numbers are really before you even get going. So again, it's easy to do. Your accounts should be protected by whatever you have, financial compensation scheme, or the equivalent, right? So it's a very low risk, really. You just have to be disciplined, as we'll touch on later as well. I would actually say that this improves credit score. Again, on the assumption that you're doing it right, it starts to build up on-time payments. Also, as well, depending on your credit utilization, like anywhere between 10 and 50% credit utilization is actually a good thing from a bank's perspective. It builds up that credit score. I was speaking to a financial advisor of mine who is a practicing financial advisor, and he recommends somewhere around 25 to 35% is the sweet spot. It kind of shows that you have access to credit, that you're a good creditor who can pay it back, and ultimately that improves your credit score as a result. So actually it can be a good thing by having access to more money and then using some of it. This is how you sort of improve your credit score. And lastly, it's somewhat scalable. Again, I mentioned my friend who I don't even know how many cards he actually has at the moment, probably about a dozen or so, but he's able to get relatively big 5-figure credit balances and just sort of rotates around. We are sort of starting to get to that point personally. We have at the moment a 15K card. I had a 12K previously, and then we've got a couple of high 4-digit cards as well. But it can become quite scalable, sort of tens of thousands fairly quickly. I'm sure it is even possible to get over 100,000. So yeah, it can become powerful from that perspective. Again, for an average person who can access these kind of money, it can become quite scalable. There will be, I'm sure, even more bespoke products and ways of doing it if you're very, a very sophisticated investor. But I think for most people who have access to credit, it is quite a scalable solution. You will be able to get several thousand, and then you can use that to get several £100s in extra money that you wouldn't have got, potentially even a couple of extra thousand again that you wouldn't have otherwise got. So these are my pros. Let's do cons. All right, so some of the cons, I think this is the biggest con. It requires discipline. Like, there's no two ways about it. If you lack discipline, this isn't for you. Missed payments will not only incur fees and you'll likely lose the 0%, but you'll also be impacted on your credit score as well. I'll also say this is somewhat short term, although I was debatable about this one. You're limited by the time duration ultimately. However, if you have a reasonable credit score, you can do this across several cards. Me and my wife currently have five active cards, so it's somewhat of a con. Again, sort of the more you do this and the more your credit score is beefed up, then the more options and this will become less of a con. But it's not a sort of you won't be able to retire from stoozing or anything like that. It's basically a nice way. I'd put it in the same category as sort of account switching or other sort of nice perks to have if you're a little bit disciplined, shop around a little bit and just keep yourself somewhat agile. You'll be able to pay for a holiday once a year if you're doing really well. Or maybe, just a nice long weekend with the missus, something like that. Yeah, but it's not going to give you the sort of long-term strategy where you'll be able to retire and all the rest of it. It can impact your credit score, even for sort of new applications. Now, most credit cards will tell you what kind of search they're doing, or they should. You can find out as well. But if you're using a lot of your credit limit, so the high utilization, if you're going above 50%, that will start to have an impact on your credit score, especially in the short term. It'll recover, but don't be surprised if it gets knocked down sort of a couple of dozen of points. My wife, who has a perfect credit score, went down to like 960 from 999. So that kind of thing. And then, within a few months later, we opened up another credit card, so the utilization went down, and she also started to make regular payments. So great. So then the credit score starts to recover again. So again, this sort of also impacts on the short-term strategy. Like you can't suddenly go from 0 cards to 10 because you won't even be able to get credit, most likely. But again, it's just not the way to do it. Basically, you'll need to build this up slowly. It's somewhat of a snowballing method. I've touched on limited returns, but again, it's definitely worth considering. It kind of ties in with the short-term strategy. Again, I nearly didn't put the short-term strategy in, but again, you won't be able to become a millionaire or anything like this, bear in mind, but it's a nice way to get extra money. And we do still have to consider any fees and taxes that you'll get from this as well, depending on your state where you are, and indeed your income is in the UK, right? There are three different thresholds for investment interest, and what you'll have to pay will impact on how much you're earning. So you need to factor that in as well, that there may well be a net fee. So these are my cons as I see them, and now we're just going to wrap everything up to decide if you should do it. All right, so should you snooze? I'm going to do a yes no here, and I'm going to explain why. Normally, I'd try and give a more firm answer, but again, this isn't financial advice. Everyone's going to feel different, and I think these are things worth considering before you decide whether you want to do this or not. So I would recommend, if you are financially disciplined, the automatic repayments, in my opinion, are a must. Whenever you're taking out a card, you should be able to set this up as part of the process. Definitely just set it up, do minimum payments, and depending on the exact card, you'll pay somewhere between 0.7% and 2%, 2.5% of your balance each month. But it still is a very efficient way of doing it. Typically, it's about 1% as the repayment. But again, you can look at the T's and C's there, and you just let it minimum take out each month whenever it works for you. So you have to factor that in. I would say this is better if you are relatively debt free. I did touch on the fact that you might have other stoozing cards and everything else. So I guess, use common sense here, guys. You want to make sure that you're not loaded up, that you don't look like you're becoming overburdened with debt from a sort of banking or credit check perspective. So although you don't have to necessarily be zero debt free, I think you do want to bear in mind your debt utilization, maybe below 50% if you want to push it, but maybe more like a quarter to a third is the sweet spot, apparently, showing that you can repay without being stretched. Again, because of the fact this will have some short-term impact on your credit score, it's better if you're coming from a good or an excellent, sort of above, let's say in the top quartile. Doesn't have to be perfect, but just bear in mind that it will impact from that perspective. And again, I think this ties into discipline. I almost didn't include it, but I think it's worth mentioning, the reminders. Just set yourself a reminder or a spreadsheet or however it is that you want to work. Whatever works for you, just do it. Because again, like because of the fact that here that you're talking like in single digit percentage arbitrage, you don't have to make too many mistakes for the whole business case to go wrong. And then suddenly, you don't have this advantage and it can actually become a burden rather than a benefit. And I guess that's a nice segue onto here. So yeah, again, I think credit card balances can become a problem. So here, it's not necessarily a hard no, especially if you have cash to cover. And I think if you're new to this, my recommendation would be to keep the cash and again, put it into a high interest savings account. to put it into, premium bonds if you're in the UK, or some method where your capital isn't at risk and you're not exposed to the stock market. So this may well limit your returns, especially in the early days, but it'll help you get that confidence and that discipline. For me as well, like I had to sort of convince my wife, so it was very much a case of, right, well, let's put it in 100% safe space, even though actually our cash flow and income, at least at the time, was pretty solid. So yeah, you need to be mindful here. You don't want to have be exposed in a situation where you don't have the cash or the income to cover it. Also, because of the fact that this will have an impact on your short-term credit score, especially if you're taking out a fairly big amount, etc. If you need to apply for other things soon, like a mortgage would be the best one, or maybe a loan or something, then actually this kind of might have an impact. It's somewhat marginal because you shouldn't really be having too much of an impact on your credit score from the stoozing, but it may well put you into the quartile below excellent and therefore have an interest impact on what you might be charged from a borrowing perspective, right? So you need to be mindful here. It's part of a broader holistic picture. And actually, maybe it's just a timing thing, right? If you're saving up for a mortgage or you're about to take out a major loan, you don't have to sort of push your luck here for a few £100. You can actually take the broader approach holistically. Similar here with discipline and ownership. If you're not confident either tracking the payments, setting up something automatic, or setting yourself reminders to pay it back when the 0% ends, don't do it. It's that simple. And I guess as a broader way to conclude, basically, if you lack discipline, this isn't for you. So, the whole concept here, especially if we keep it nice and straightforward with a balance transfer, you've put 5 grand onto the credit card, you put that 5 grand that you would have otherwise paid into a savings account, and you don't touch it. If you're the kind of person who will have to go out and spend that 5k because it's in your bank account, then you've just screwed yourself basically, because now you've got nothing in your savings account. You won't be getting that 300, 400 quid. And you've also now got a commitment that you're going to have to pay back in 12, 18, 24 months. So it does require a certain level of discipline. You should not be touching the capital really, and you should just be enjoying the let's say 5% interest that you might be able to get from it. So that's my do or don't. Ultimately, everyone is accountable for their own decisions, including you, dear viewer. And hopefully that's been interesting. So I like Stoozing. I use it somewhat. We have access to about 30 grand at the moment. And if you watch my wealth building videos, I detail exactly where and from where. And that's how we run it. But ultimately, it's up to you. These are some things to consider before you do it. If you do go or you don't decide to do it, let me know either way. I am genuinely curious if this has sort of swayed you one way or another. If you do it, then good luck. Enjoy the arbitrage and don't be an idiot. Thanks very much for watching. Hopefully you've enjoyed this first lesson from Prof Hog, and bye for now.